Ken Gutzo.
And I'm Shelley Stockwell-Nicholas, President of the International Hypnosis Federation. Please enjoy cutting-edge information, changing the world one person at a time. The International Hypnosis Federation.
HYP-TALKS. Watch this now.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next speakers will be teaching you once upon a time the power of the metaphor. And I had the privilege of taking a class with them in Malibu a few years ago, and I have to honestly say, you two changed the course of my writing. You were inspirational in taking me down the road of truth, which is the power of the tale, the power of the story. Now, these are not two guys who just fell off the cabbage truck. These are two remarkable men. One is Peter Blum. He lives in Woodstock, New York, the Woodstock. He's actually putting on a storytelling conference in Woodstock. It's a festival, and it'll be the Woodstock Storyteller Festival coming up this year. And he is a remarkable musician, healer. Some of you walked the labyrinth with him this morning. He's also a very powerful storyteller, and he knows the ways of the people, the indigenous ones. He's palled up today with a remarkable psychiatrist, Dr. Mehl Madrona. And I'm writing a book on the history of medical hypnosis and researching thoroughly. And this man has published hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles all about the use of hypnosis in medicine. He's remarkable, he's amazing, he's prolific, and he is himself an indigenous one. Dr. Mehl Madrona and Peter Blum. We're so thrilled you're here. I'll get another chair for Peter. I don't have a stool, but I have a chair.
Do you want to sit?
We can sit. Or I can sit.
So, we want to tell you a little bit about the story, and we want to tell you the story. And I have a story about the story, and I know Peter does too. But my story,
Just organization will change batteries.
Okay. My story about story is that I was a medical student once upon a time, not too far from here off the road a piece. And they gave us a lot of time to spend with patients. I don't know what was wrong with them, but they did. And I'd run out of things to do or ask, you know. And then I'd be a little nervous because I wanted to spend the whole time. And so I started telling them stories that I'd heard growing up from my grandmother and different people. And people liked it. You know, it was kind of fun, and I liked it. And one day somebody said, "Where did you learn hypnosis?" And I said, "What's that?" You know, and they explained to me what was hypnosis, because of course we had two professors who were very into hypnosis at the time. And I thought, wow, so that's what my grandmother was doing to me all those years. You know, because whenever my grandmother wanted you to do something, she'd tell you the story. And you'd either do it first before the story to avoid the story, or you'd dutifully listen to the whole story and say, next time I'll just do it first, like take out the garbage or wash the dishes or whatever, weed the garden, you know, whatever the story was meant to make you do, you know, you would end up doing it. And so that was my introduction to hypnosis, was by discovering that what indigenous people do is similar to what people do who say they do hypnosis. your story.
So, first of all, it's such an honor and a privilege to be up here with this man who's a good friend of mine, but also has been a tremendous influence and a teacher for me. And I got involved in stories as a kid. I used to just bury myself. I used to come to school, go to the library, and read, fairy tales, fantasy and stories. So I was very much in my imagination and loved stories. And then somewhere along the line, I'm skipping forward, fast forward, in the 1980s, I was introduced to hypnosis, and my teacher, Richard Zarrow, kept talking about Milton Erickson. You gotta find out about Milton Erickson. There was a book called My Voice Will Go With You, the teaching class of Milton Erickson. And I was reading it, and here's this psychiatrist who would tell his patients stories. And this book is a collection of his teaching stories, and there's amazing, I mean, I kept thinking, these are stories about him raising his kids, or him growing up, or different clients and patients that he had. And at one point, I said to Richard, it's just extraordinary. This guy had the perfect teaching story for almost every situation. And Richard said, yes, and nobody knows how many, if any of them are true. There was a moment of disillusionment there. But then years later, somebody said, never let the facts get in the way of a good story. And I understood. No, seriously, and my studies and curiosity led me all over the place. In Buddhism, for instance, they talk about relative truth and universal truth. Relative truth. And so these stories may not have been, relatively true, but they were universally true. And so I became enamored of stories and the use of stories, and I was fascinated with it, and developing in parallel. I found was Lewis was working with narrative therapy and narrative psychiatry, and now he and Barb, who we present shortly, his wife, just wrote a book called Remapping the Brain, the transformative, what is the
Neuroscience of self-transformation through story.
Yeah, easy for you to say. So, but it really is amazing, because we've had Shelley and some other folks have talked about what goes on in the brain during hypnosis. Well, there's very interesting things that go on in the brain when we hear a story. And stories fascinate us. They capture our attention. This morning when Anne was up here, I mean, I was mesmerized because it was an extraordinary story. And I was like, what's going to happen next? And then what happened? And, people remember stories. And there's something that happens with clients where, they're in hypnosis, we work with spells. We do. I mean, these hypnotic inductions are the contemporary version of magical incantations and spells. And there are 3 words, there are a couple of them, but the 3 that I'm thinking of that open every doorway and immediately lower conscious resistance on once upon a time.
4 words.
4 words. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Right, 4 words.
3 words in French.
Thank you. So immediately you have instant age regression. People make a big deal about age regression. All you have to do is go once upon a time, and everyone's like, okay, someone's going to tell me a story. I don't have to worry about whether this is about me. I don't have to prefigure whether this is getting suggestions about how to do my life differently or how to understand things. This is a story. I can just sit back and enjoy it and listen to it. Meanwhile, we're sneaking in around, the conscious mind and giving nice suggestions to the unconscious in a way that is enjoyable. It's, that's the other thing that I've been learning for years is, transformational work can be a lot of fun. Shelley, you always want to get people laughing, and Michael Elmer, my buddy, and I always talk about this horrible condition of seriosity. It is treatable.
So I'll just talk a little bit about some of the neuroscience, not too much, but a little bit, because We all love neuroscience. So it turns out that story and hypnosis both interact with the anterior cingulate cortex. And if you don't know where that is, you should get 3D brain app from Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories, because then you can look at every brain part while we talk about them. Downloadable for very cheap. And so this anterior cingulate cortex, it sits about right in here, toward the front, sits on top, it's the very bottom of the cerebral cortex, and only primates and humans have it. Dogs don't have it. Apparently dogs are not as into story as we are. They're more into food. Food.
Squirrel.
Food. I learned from my dog that a food in the hand is better than a squirrel in the bush. So what happens in the anterior cingulate cortex is that its job is to resolve conflict, to reduce conflict, one of its many jobs. And so we walk around in a lot of conflict. You know, we're struggling with, you know, what to do in situations, how to deal with people that we're having conflict with. So when you're in a state of hypnosis, that anterior cingulate goes down, and it dissociates from this lateral frontal lobe area that kind of guides your behavior for how to resolve conflict. So you just let go. So in story, something similar happens, because story activates what's called the posterior cingulate cortex, meaning it's behind the anterior. And it activates this story brain that we all have, which is as old as the hills. And so when story brain comes online, anterior cingulate chills. It says, oh, I'm just going to listen to a story, like Peter said. I'm not going to worry about conflict resolution and error detection and all those things that I'm trained to do. Oh, God. Somebody's just going to tell me a story. And story brain then turns off other parts of the brain. It turns off executive function. That's the part of the brain that makes lists and check boxes. Gets jobs done. Good to have on occasion. Good to have at the grocery store. Otherwise you'll buy too much stuff. But, so there is this midline structure, circuit, that goes all the way back. And it has to do with the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the orbitofrontal cortex, comes back into the temporal lobe, goes back into the visual cortex, and story activates more of the brain than anything else you could possibly do. Everything else is a reduction in brain activity. So, and paradoxically, reducing your brain activity requires more energy. You have to burn more glucose to meditate than you do to do story. So story gets our full attention, and it activates this visual streaming that we do. You know, just like hypnosis does. Both hypnosis and story activate these posterior occipital cortical areas. They're called visual associational cortices. And they associate visual images together and deliver them forward to be connected with verbal images, to be connected with...
By the way, this is also known as an overload induction.
Yes.
Oh, keep it up.
You are getting sleepy. Neuroscience has been known.
It is a doctor. You know what happens when you go and see a doctor, right? The doctor said your trapezium is connected to the Zunderwald, but that's behind the Zunderwald. You just do this and you walk out and go, what did he say?
He said exercise!
Exercise.
Yeah. So that's probably enough neuroscience.
It's good. This is a very intelligent group.
You can read more in our book. There's a small advertisement. Yeah. So story is marvelous. The story just opens us up to other dimensions and uses the imagination, which must be good for something, or we wouldn't have one. And, well, you have more to say about that.
I do. Well, I want to make sure that we have time, because Lewis has a story that we had an extensive planning session for about a minute outside earlier. And no, we've done this a fair amount, you know, over the years. He started out as my teacher, and now we often co-present, although I always let him sit higher up than me. That's, you know, keep the relationship in proper perspective. I'm chronologically older, but he got there first. So the story that you're going to tell is just leave me, if you would, about 3 minutes at the end for a story that I would like to tell, and then I'm also going, because I can, you know, like that joke about why do dogs lick themselves? Because they can. Wow, because I can, and I brought a drum, I'm going to give a little bit of soft drumming accompaniment to Lewis's story, which is in many indigenous cultures that's traditional. There's, you know, the griots of Africa and a lot of storytelling. The bardic tradition, they would have a harp and they would travel around from village to village and tell the news of, oh, so-and-so got married, and so-and-so's aunt died, and there would always be some kalimba or harp or musical accompaniment, and it also is part of the transduction rhythmical entrainment, which we do of parsing our words in a certain way when we talk.
Right. So this is a story that I came up with for a young man whom I've been working with more or less, mostly less, for the past 6 years, who's mild to moderately psychotic, depending on the day of the week. And he's at a point in his life where he won't leave his house. And that can be difficult because he's also at a point in his life where he wants a girl. And it's hard to get a girl if you won't leave your house. So apparently they don't make house calls if they don't know you. So we're struggling. And so, you know, and he's a really big guy. Big in every, he's wide and he's tall and he's large. And so, so he was telling me today, when I was talking with him earlier, that he fancies himself a warrior. And he collects swords, but his parents have taken away most of his swords because they're afraid of what he might do with them. But he has one left that's kind of dull, that they allow him to practice with. And he said, you know, what I really want is a warrior story. And I had to think for a minute, and I said, well, I got a Choctaw story that might fit the bill for you. And here's the story. Once upon a time, there was a brave warrior, and he was very handsome, and his family was very wealthy. And he was incredibly skilled with the bow and arrow and the spear and hunting and the art of war. I mean, he was just a really talented guy. And he wanted a mate. But he was worried because a lot of the young women in the tribe were attracted to him because he was handsome, because he had a wealthy family, because he was talented. And he really wanted a mate who could see through all that, who could just see his essence, his heart. And so he prayed, you know, to the spirits to find a mate like that. And spirits heard his prayer, and they turned him into a bear. And he looks at himself and says, oh my God, I'm a bear. How am I going to get a girl if I'm a bear? And so the spirit chief sent a deer to tell him, to explain it all. And so the deer came along and said, look, dude, you made these prayers. You've got to be careful when you're praying, because you always get what you pray for. And so here's how it's going to work. Spirit Chief is going to tell the elders of your tribe, every week, once a week, to bring a fair maiden here to this place where you're going to now live, which is called a cave by a spring. So at least you've got some water to drink. And so every week, the elders are going to bring a fair maiden to this place to meet you. And if it's the one, you nod yes. And if it's not, just go no. I suppose bears can go like that too. Thumbs up, thumbs down. And he says, well, all right, who goes? I mean, what choice did he have, right? He got his prayers are answered. And so he retreated to the cave and waited. And sure enough, one of the elders appeared with a fair maiden. And he steps out of the cave and she goes, "Eek, a bear!" and runs away. He looks at the elder and he says, so every week for over a year, this is repeated. Every week for over a year. He's getting a little tired of this game, What is it that Spirit Chief had in mind, Because we can doubt the spirits when they, take us down the garden path that our prayers led us. And one day, a very beautiful maiden shows up. And he comes out of his cave and she says, "Hello." He's like, "Rawr." And she says, "Hello." And he says, "Rawr." And she says, "You're a nice looking fellow." And suddenly his voice comes back and he says, Don't you see a bear?" And she said, "Where?" "Maybe in the back of the cave there's a bear." And he said, "Well, no." And he said, "Aren't you scared?" And she said, "Why should I be scared? You seem like a nice, loving kind of person." And he's just shocked, and in that moment of shock, he turns back into a human being. Yeah. And now it's her turn to be surprised. "Oh, well, you look different, but you're still the same being with this new suit that you just turned into." And so he tells her the story. And she listens to the story, and they fall in love. And they go back to the village, and they have a little courting, and they get married, and they live happily ever after. The end. Yay! So before I turn the microphone over to Peter, you can imagine. So there's a suggestion that we might meet every week for over a year. Did you get that? That suggestion? Yeah, that's in the story.
The therapy suggestion.
Yeah. Well, he's been. This is only the second time we've met. For 2 years, because he's been anti-therapy, anti-help. But we've met now twice, and so I thought, well, I'll sneak in a little suggestion to meet more than every week for over a year, and then maybe something magical will happen. Maybe he'll transform. It might take over a year of weekly meetings for him to transform. Maybe something like getting the girls out. I don't know any girls to send his way, but magic happens. So now my job for our next meeting is to come up with another warrior story. So I'll have to do some research for another good warrior story. But he told me, he said, "I like that story. I'm going to keep that story with me all week." All right, I said, "Good deal."
Hunting requires that you leave the cave.
Hunting requires that you leave the cave.
A lot.
A lot.
The worst thing that someone can ask a story for is, what does that mean?
If there's time, I have a story about
I
that.
know that's a story about a story. You shrug and you go, it's just a story. And then you go on quickly before they start.
It doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything, right. So we were talking about paths, Jane and I, earlier today, and I was quoting Don Juan, telling Carlos Castaneda, all paths lead nowhere. Just pick a path with heart. Doesn't matter which one it is. But, you know, I draw a lot from the world's spiritual traditions, and I'm always looking for good stories. And I also find that if I can leave people laughing, sometimes that helps as well. With, you know, James talked about surprise getting our attention. And also humor is often based on the unexpected. And something that is not what you expect will get your attention, and you will remember that. So in many traditions, there is the striving for enlightenment in different parts, different cultures, this awakening. What is that? You know, and so this is a story of a young man who was determined to become enlightened. And I meet a lot of people. I live in Woodstock. It's, you know, one of the spiritual meccas of the current world. And there are people, everyone and their mother-in-law has done some form of meditation or vision quest or something. And there's a lot of you know, people talking about, I took this class on the law of distraction at Omega, and that's called slide of mouth. So it's, anyway, he's determined. 5 minutes, got it. I'll talk fast. And thank you. I usually bring a little bell up here to ring if people yawn. They get a bell to reward. It means we're doing our job. And so he finds that there's a monastery where they are very strict practice, where they meditate for 8 hours a day. And the rest of the time they take a vow of silence. And all they do is prepare the food and eat the food and work in the garden and meditate for 8 hours a day every day. And at the end of 10 years, he's rigorously applied himself. And at the end of 10 years, he's allowed an audience with the abbot of the monastery, who is, in this case, a Roshi, because it's a Zen monastery. And, you know, in the way that you to show the teacher that you've gotten it, that you understand, and you've had transmission, he's allowed 2 words. And so at the end of 10 years, he comes in and he bows to the Roshi, and the Roshi bows back, and the Roshi looks at him and he says, knees hurt. The Roshi goes, you're not even close. If you want to stick around, you can meditate 8 hours a day and keep silence for another 10 years. So he does. He's determined to. Duncan's gone. And he does this for 8 hours a day in silence, meditating, not a word. At the end of another 10 years, he's allowed back for his second audience with the Roshi. And the Roshi bows to him, and he bows back, and he has his 2 words, and he says, back hurts. You know, sitting and meditating for a long time, the Roshi goes, no, you don't got it. Go back, leave. Oh, please let me stay. All right, okay, you can stay for 10 more years. So after 30 years, he goes in for his third audience with the Roshi. And, you know, he's determined, he's been meditating for 8 hours a day, and the Roshi, by this time, is a wizened old man. He's pretty old himself. And he gets up there and they look at each other, a long, meaningful look in the eyes, and he bows, and he says to the Roshi, I quit. And the Roshi goes, I'm not surprised you've done nothing but complain ever since you got here. All right, so we have 1 minute, 2 minutes, 2 minutes for questions.
What does that mean?
It was just a story.
It means you have 2 minutes to ask questions. Next question.
Can we say a comfort
Yes, absolutely. April 30th, May 1st, come to beautiful Woodstock, the Woodstock sides, home of the Woodstock Festival, the first annual Woodstock Story Festival. Our own Dr. Shelley Stockwell will be a guest presenter there. Dr. Lewis and Barb will be presenting. I'll be there, carrying on, and we line up of amazing, amazing people. Joya Timpanelli, who is one of the world, the doyen of American storytelling movement, 80 years old, lives in Woodstock. She will be there. Just wonderful, wonderful stuff. So come see me at the back if you're more interested in any of that stuff. Because story, you said, and correct me if I'm misquoting you, but that it's difficult to talk psychology with the Lakota because there's no word for self. No word for self in the Lakota language. The closest word is a word called nagi, which means a swarm, literally. So I meet Duncan and I see him as a swarm of constantly changing stories. All the stories you've ever heard about yourself, the stories that you've told others, the stories you've told yourself and others that you actually believe are true. So we say, a lot of what we do in our work in hypnosis is there are no bad people, there are just bad stories. No, and if somebody doesn't have a good story, so we can learn from personal narrative, but also learning about the myth, the stories, all there is the thread that holds everything together. All this whole conference is one big story that keeps unfolding.
And we could close with a quote from Milton Erickson. He said that psychotherapy was the art of replacing bad stories with good stories.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lewis, Mehl Madrona, Peter Blum, fantastic. Fantastic. Reminds me of a story.